we'll kind of walk you through the SOPs and show you how to get there, which I'm pretty sure many, if not all of you already know. We're just going to wait a few minutes. Is Rob Tess on? Sorry, I only
Yep.
have. Okay, Rob.
Yeah, I'm here.
And then Natalie,
I hit the record button. Natalie, did you want to do that, or?
I don't think it matters as long as you started recording. So I was going to tell people that, yeah, we will be recording the session, and then it'll be on TalentLMS for anyone to watch in the future. And at the end of this training, there will be a short quiz, and then people who come later and watch the video and the PowerPoint on TalentLMS also takes the quiz, and that will satisfy the requirements, of getting this training. So with that being said, Rob, do you just want to kick it off? I'll move it to the next slide.
Sure. Okay, so I think most everybody should be pretty familiar with with this graphic at this point, and I apologize. I'm gonna hack a little bit first thing in the morning talking for me. So, so this lays out the relationship between ECC's model of project management and the PMI model. And although they faded away, the PMI model has faded away already. We basically initiation, planning, execution. In PMI, it's the stage 4 is monitoring and controlling, but we call it control and report, and then finally close. The biggest difference being that in the initiation and planning stages, we treat that as pre-bid and post-award. Excuse me. So next slide, Shovik. So we have 4 project management SOPs, numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 101, 102, 103, and 104. We've tried to keep these as bigger bucket SOPs to help ourselves make compliance a little easier, and so that we don't have hundreds and hundreds of SOPs, but within each SOP we've got sample checklists, some instructional models, little attachments that should help a project manager know exactly what to do for each aspect of the SOP. And to supplement that, we also have the roadmap, which we've been talking about quite a bit lately, especially through the PMBOK training that we're doing through TalentLMS, and trying to relate the PMI model to the ECC project management model. And that roadmap has a number of links to other more detailed aspects of how ECC manages projects. And you can see on this slide we've got the to the roadmap, and we'll go there at some point during this the next half hour or so, just to make sure that everybody knows what the current updated roadmap looks like and how it works. And we're going to use it to navigate to a couple of the SOPs as Shovik and I run through the general contents of each SOP. I think you can go to the next slide, Shovik. Okay, so does anybody have any general SOP questions before we move into the actual SOP discussions? I hope everybody knows how to use the raise your hand button, which is in the top right of the top right of your team screen. Hopefully by now everybody knows how to use that. So just if you have any questions as we're going along, or you have a point that you'd like to make, please just raise your hand, and Shovik or I will give you the floor for a few minutes. Okay, so diving right in. SOP PM 101, the project transition workshop. So the language here on the slide is direct from the SOP. It states the purpose of the SOP. So the purpose of the workshop is to facilitate rapid project startup by ensuring knowledge transfer from the proposal team to the integrated project team to align project resources and identify initial project deliverables. This is really it's the shift from pre-bid to post-award, and really cannot stress how important this is to make sure that that the execution team knows how the project was proposed. The transition is, of course, everybody knows that this is required. We do it quite frequently for big contracts, for new contracts. But one of the points we're trying to get across to everybody is that it is required for all projects, regardless of size, regardless of complexity, regardless of whether or not the execution team is the same as the bidding team. So even if the proposal team is the execution team, it is still important that you conduct and document a transition workshop. It is also required, and although it might not necessarily be a massive workshop, but at least a meeting is required when a project has a change of project manager. So that's a really key aspect of the transition, that if we're transitioning from one project manager to another for whatever reason, then the workshop needs to be conducted. Next slide, Jovik. So these are the steps for the workshop, just to set it up, and the general requirements for what our expectations are for when it happens. So the pre-workshop telecon should be set up as soon as possible. And this is just a brief meeting. It doesn't involve everybody. It involves only the primary key players of the project to prepare the information, to make sure that all the information is gathered in the right location for the full, the full transition workshop, and then also to take care of anything that's immediately needed, bonding, insurance, if there are any, or owed with the first few days of a contract award. The workshop itself should be done within the first 2 weeks of award, and I know that we're not always spot on with that. It also needs to be done at a sensible time to make sure that you get maximum participation. So there is a little bit of flexibility there, but we should not be delaying in conducting the workshop, because we want to get that information to the execution team while it's as fresh as possible in the proposal team's mind. Granted, we know our clients sometimes wait 30, 60, 90 days, a year longer to award contracts to us. So sometimes that's, the information is not always fresh, but by conducting the workshop within a couple weeks, we have our best shot at efficient transfer of knowledge. And then again, I just want to reiterate that even if the proposal team and the execution team are the same deadlines should still apply. And another reason that we stress that this is required, even if the teams are the same, is that the larger company has certain triggers that need to pass information on to other people who are not involved in the proposal stage of a project. And so we need to make sure that those folks are also involved and understand what the project requirements are. So again, just to reiterate that. And then as far as timing of a transition workshop or meeting when we have a change of PM, you have to be a little bit flexible there, because you will depend on the circumstances of the current PM's departure. Sometimes we have just a planned transition of a PM from design to construction, say. Sometimes we just have to rotate people because of opportunities or other obligations. But sometimes, sometimes people quit, and so a transition might be sudden. So the goal with the change of PM transition is to have it conducted at least in the first week of the new PM's startup of being involved in the project. Next slide. Okay, so what does the transition meeting include? So the agenda is in the SOP, or there's a sample agenda in the SOP, and we're gonna flip over to EchoNet in a second here, and show that. For me personally, I usually start with the bond deck as a starting point. I think it's a good way to because most people, especially on the proposal team, are familiar with the bond deck. So it's a good way to, and the proposal team is used to presenting the bond deck as a way to describe the project to senior leadership. And so it's a good transition mechanism to catch the wider audience for the execution team. The important thing with the agenda is to remember that it's flexible, that the agenda looks pretty extensive, and the components are extensive, but the requirements you should adjust accordingly depending on the size of the project. You're not going to need as extensive of a agenda for a small project as you would for a very large project. And the same goes for the transition meeting time. Typically, a transition meeting for an average size project, they are typically running around 4 to 6 hours. We've had a few that run 2 days. Big, large projects like the Little Rock project. I think that was a 2-day session. So you should schedule the meeting in a way that you can capture the most number of people and a way that is appropriate to the project size. And then the list of attendees. So we've included a list of attendees here on the slide. The same list appears in the SOP on EchoNet. And again, the goal is to right size the attendee list based on the project that you're kicking off. And so and that attendee list is usually developed in the pre-transition teleconference. So and if you have any doubts about who you should contact or who should be involved, what's an appropriate level, of course, that you can always talk with your program manager or program director. Shovik and I are always available to offer advice on any of these SOPs. So you can always contact us. And then again, attendee list for the transition mid-project from one PM to the other. Again, it's just a flexible list of attendees. Start with the project team that's existing and expand out to make sure that the appropriate people are included. Let's see. Next slide. Could everybody make sure they're on mute? Sorry. Excuse me. So last point in project transition workshop, generally the ground rules of the workshop. So this isn't an opportunity for everybody to slam each other on what mistakes were made in the estimate or those kind of things. That's reserved for well, blame is never a good game. So but finding where we could have been better, we usually reserve that for a lessons learned session. The transition workshop needs to be focused on execution and problem solving if we've uncovered issues. So if we've uncovered issues, maybe we found new risks since we bid the job, then the transition workshop is a good opportunity for us to bring those to the forefront so that the entire project team can find solutions and come up with a plan to successfully execute the project. So no placing of blame, focus on solutions. Second point of the workshop, and this kind of combines all three of these next bullets, is that it requires that the team be engaged. And we all, especially in current work from home situations, we're all often very distracted. We start to do other things while we're on meetings, but it is really critical that everybody come prepared and remain engaged, and make sure that everybody understands what action items they have. So it's really important to the success of the project that everybody takes the workshop seriously. And then finally on the workshop is documentation. So it's critical that we document the workshop, everything that we have in these SOPs, documentation that we've met the SOP requirements is required for our ISO certification. And so documentation of the meeting through meeting minutes, and if hopefully we're doing Teams meetings now, and so anybody who participates can be, you can capture the participants list within Teams. If you don't know how to do that, I think Shovik may be able to show us how. If not, we can guide you through it. So very important that as the final step in the transition workshop, you document that it happened and who attended. I think that's it on the transition workshop. Any questions, comments, complaints? No? Okay, so moving on to SOP PM 102, which is project execution. And this one is going to be somewhat generic because the SOP is a little bit high level. So it's really just a description of generally how ECC follows the main processes of project execution. And so the bullets here on this slide are the main sections of the SOP. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other processes that happen, but this SOP hits the highlights that the project manager and the project team need to primarily make sure that we have covered as we're going through the project. And I'm not gonna read them all off. And I think as we get to the end here, we're gonna flip through some of the SOPs, and we'll show you where all those are. But it includes things like subcontractor management and plan of the day, and those kind of things. Client alignment is a recent addition to the SOP. So let's go to the next slide, Shovik. So again, the highlights of the SOP are, there's a checklist for startup. There's a discussion of the roles and responsibilities of the PM, subcontracts admin, and project controls personnel in how we manage subcontracts. There's the discussion on project controls is mostly a link to the project controls SOPs that are also available on EchoNet. There's a task instruction and a sample agenda for plan of the day meeting, which every project should be doing some form of the plan of the day. There's a discussion and again a relationship to another set of SOPs. So for material management, QC inspections, submittal management, and that relates the PM process to the ESQ SOPs. There's a discussion on records management. So I think everybody knows now that all of our projects have to use the MS Teams /SharePoint site for storage, and as appropriate, we'll set up a project portal in EchoNet to if we've got a project that requires submittal management, RFI management through the portal, then we'll do that. But primarily we use MS Teams, the MS Teams methodology to get to cloud storage for our project files. There's a brief section in here on change management, but really it just refers us to change management SOP, which Shovik is going to talk about in a little bit here. And then recent addition, like I said previously, we've just modified the SOP. So I think the version on EchoNet will be updated this week. It does not currently have the client alignment section, but that's a critical aspect of all the projects that we do, and a critical responsibility of project managers to understand the client's perception of us, and to manage the client's perception of us, and to turn the project into an outstanding CPARS. And so we've recently added a discussion on client alignment. Shovik, do you want to run through the remainder of the sections, or before we go to EchoNet, or do we want to bounce back and forth?
I think it might be better if I just go over these. This should be quick, and then maybe you can switch over and just go through EchoNet.
I would agree.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So I have a little technical snafu and I only have one screen. So I'm going to say that let me go through PM 103 and 104. And then if anybody has any questions, just wait until then, and then we can address any questions at that time. So PM 103 is project closeout. And what this SOP does is it establishes what are the closeout requirements that ECC has, or what we do as closeout processes, who's responsible, and then what are the various methods in order to close out projects. So why close out? What's the stress on closeout? The other day we were at the PMP training, and Ivan had some numbers, and I don't recall exact ones, but something to the order of we have like close to 300 projects in the system, and only like 115 are active. So which means that there's more than 100% of projects beyond active that are not closed out. And every once in a while, I'm sure somebody is charging some time to it. There's some maintenance work going on in terms of looking at controls, monthly reports, and so forth. So there's a lot of leakage going on. So basically, we want to close the projects out so that there's no more leakage, and we lock GM. And then the other thing is that when as a PM, you're going to need support from your project team to close these things out, and you're going to make sure that the documents we need are handy. And the longer you stretch it out, the personnel leave for other projects, documents get stored in the wrong place, and then it's really difficult to find them. So that's why it is important that there is a closeout in the schedule, and let's get it done at that time and close them out one by one. So the key takeaway from this SOP is that the closeout really begins in the planning phase. When Rob showed earlier the ECC phases, and planning is just project startup, it's post-award. We do need to take a stock of what it requires to close the project out, and at least, if nothing else, have a checklist, have a designated folder on SharePoint that we put planning or closing stuff in there, so that at the end of the project, we're not scrambling. Somebody is in charge of closing right from the beginning, which usually the PM, but could be somebody else designated. And then responsibility. So for almost everything in a project, the buck stops with the PM, but he does get the QC manager or the QC personnel in general will help out, with making sure that all the documents are finalized, looking at a submittal register, for instance, as well as inspections, checklists that are, punch list items that are closed. So all that is supported by the project team. And then on the more administrative end, the contract admin and the controls people help close out POs, make sure all invoices are final, subcontracts have provided whatever deliverable they have to do. So all that put together, brings the project closeout. So I wanted to touch on this one phrase that is used in the SOP, and it's called red zone planning. And to be honest, I didn't know what it was when I first looked at the SOP. It is a commonly used DoD term. I think especially the Navy uses it a lot. And in summary, what it is that at the sort of 80% mark of a project, the team sits down with the client, and then they go over what it takes to close the project out. and they come up with some checklists, and then they just track it to make sure that each item is touched upon, so that when the project ends, all of those things are done. So that's the red zone planning, and you're going to see it. And essentially, it's a good idea. We do have a checklist developed at the beginning, but sometimes over time that may fade from memory. So definitely that 80% mark is a good time to kind of get on it again and make sure everything is checked off and everybody walks away completed. A lot of closure documentation is in the SOP, and I've put a list out here. But I think a couple of things I just wanted to point out. One is, for an ECC in-house closure requirement is that as your project ends, prepare a brief summary description with some choice pictures and send it to CCT. Because to win new jobs, we have to have a good track of what projects have been done, what our key metrics were, achievements were. So if those are already listed somewhere, it really makes it makes our life a lot simpler to bid new jobs. And then pictures, of course, is always a great addition to our proposals. And one thing to note is that even though there are some, warranties as bills and things like that are listed, but every contract may have some very unique closure requirement. So the best idea is to have a good review of the contract and then add those closeout documents in your checklist so that people are aware of it. I think Ivan is also talking that controls people often do it because they have to prepare things for the final form submission. But I think all key project personnel should look at that because that closeout documentation might not all be invoice related. There could be some technical things as well. The SOP also has a project closeout checklist. And again, when we switch to Econet, I think we can take a quick swing at that. But that's, again, a good thing to just assist the PM to get the projects closed out. All right, moving on to the SOP 104, which is project change management. And as Rob said, in PM 102, it refers to this SOP because this topic is so important that it probably warrants an SOP by itself. I mean, change management is integral to any project management for a successful project. So this SOP essentially has a guidance for change management. And there can be two kinds of change management. So the first kind, it comes in two parts. The first kind is where either the client tells you that they want something different from the baseline scope. So they direct you, you provide what your impacts are, and they issue a change order. And the second part of that might be that we could tell the client that, hey, there is something here that is different from the baseline conditions, and this warrants a change, and the client agrees. And then again, together, we work and prepare a change order request, and then the client issues us a mod for that extra work. What we have to do, especially for the second part, is that we need to make sure that we notify the client within stipulated timeframes. The SOP does talk about the FAR clauses, but sometimes, beyond FAR clauses, or if we are working outside the DoD system, there could be contractual requirements for submitting notifications and estimates within 5 days or 10 days. So we just need to be cognizant of it and make sure we respond accordingly. And then the other thing which is stressed on in the SOP is that not only do we have to make sure that we understand the change and what our cost impacts are, but any subs who are involved in that change, they also need to have a very thorough understanding of their cost and schedule impacts, because we can't keep going back to the till for more changes or more requests for a single change. So we need to be very comprehensive when we get back and make sure that our request covers everything. So that's the first part. The second part of change management is where the client does not accept that it is a change and they direct ECC to continue working. And in that case, what we need to do is just tell the client that we don't agree, and that's okay. We agree to disagree. We'll keep working, but we are going to seek compensation via an REA. And that's where, we don't have a mod in place. We do the work, but we probably need to be very, very diligent in capturing correspondences, backup documentation, and all kinds of costs so that at the end of the job, we can put all that together and then submit for that REA. For any change management, the responsibility lies with the entire team. So everybody should have their antennas up and understand the baseline scope so that any change is immediately brought up the chain to the project manager or whoever it be. And that ensures that the project manager can then do that notification in writing within the stipulated timeframes. And I've talked about what they are per the FAR clause, but again, it could be different. So check your contracts. Our policy, as the SOP states, is that we need to do the notification via a formal correspondence, and then each correspondence needs to have a number. So we have a correspondence log. Again, this is just for tracking purposes, as well as when you go back to a project where personnel may have moved on, and you need to find those letters so that it's part of the REA. Very important that we need to have those, in some kind of a sequenced tracking manner. A change log, which is what changes were submitted and perhaps the status with whether was it accepted or is it ongoing or is it an REA. That should also be part of project documentation. Any details should also be included in daily or weekly reports. And this is part of creating that backup document that on such and such date, we had told you, we had pointed out to so and so that there was this change in condition. So the daily and weekly reports are also a very, very important means, for QC personnel or project engineers to put these change conditions down. Acceptance of change request. So again, I'm just going through all the sections in the SOP. So this is making sure that when we get the change request and then it's worked with the client and we negotiate and sign something, we need to make sure that all the impacts are captured. And one of the key ones is that if there is a change to schedule, we need to understand what the cost impact of that is and have that as part of our change request, because we do not want to add any time to the schedule that is not also compensated for in terms of the money that will be spent for that extra time, general conditions, utilities, stuff like that. I've talked about how subcontractors, we just need to make sure that they are thoroughly reviewed. Their work is reviewed to make sure that they have considered all the cost impacts. And then in the case of an REA, if the client offers us something that we don't agree with, then it is absolutely fine to not sign it, continue the work, and then go ahead and submit an REA later on. And probably a good thing to do might be is to bring that up the chain so that on site you don't end up with a conflict. You do the work and let that disagreement happen at a different level so that the disagreement is documented and can all be brought to bear at a future date. But definitely don't want to sign a mod that we don't think was fair to us. And again, part of change management is that make sure that all applicable project documents are updated so that all the changes, if you have to update the schedule, add a new WBS, work plans get modified, and then of course the POs have to be adjusted perhaps if there is new work or new things to be purchased or subs to be modded as well. So we just need to update that. It all goes back to document management and will serve as backup for REAs. Also, if we are having unauthorized change cost, and I talked about this, that we just need to have a new WBS so that later on it is extremely simple to pull that cost out, from a single WBS about a single change, as opposed to try and figuring it out with days and hours and time cards and so forth. So best practice, new WBS for authorized change costs. Again, the SOP also has all the common FAR clauses that are change management, and these are usually in the contract. So it's good to be aware of those ones as well, so that you know what triggers what and the timeframes for those. Okay, so the PM roadmap. I'm going to switch to Rob soon, but just very quickly, again, the roadmap also can be navigated through Econet, from Econet to Operations, PMCX, and then Select Roadmap. And what it is a guideline for best practices in various fields of ECC operations. And it's divided into 13 knowledge areas, and those are listed there. And they are spread across the 5 project phases. And then we'll show you that if you go to each one, there's activities, both across rows and columns here. And for each activity, if you click on, you'll get a definition. You'll get a link to an SOP if that is applicable. But if it is something that we start doing as we start new tasks, I think after a while we'll all just fall into the routine of following that kind of a uniform process. It's not hugely prescriptive, but I think it's something that will make us all do things in a similar fashion, and I think that will just help us all executing projects in the future. So Rob, I don't know if you want to just switch over to Econet here.
Sure. Let me. Can you see my screen?
I'm sorry. Let me just. Yes.
Okay. I'm getting a horrible echo for some reason. All right, let me try that. Okay, so this is the front page of Econet. I think everybody should know this by now. So to get to the roadmap, operations, I highly recommend that you bookmark it in your favorites, but just for purposes of those who might be new, operations, PMCX, and then the PM roadmap is here. You can also get to the SOPs through the shared drive, but PM roadmap is the easiest mechanism. And so let me shrink that. Okay, so this is the new and improved roadmap. It's for those of you who have been here for a while, it's a little more efficient than it used to be. I agree, it still looks kind of daunting, but we have streamlined it a bit, and I can assure you that everything that's in here is of some use to you as a project manager. There is some repetitive process links in here, just because there are certain things that apply no matter what stage of the project you're in. And then just very quickly, there's a detailed view for. I guess we got a script. So I'm not gonna be able to show you the detailed view, but it's a more linear view of the process groups and processes, for those of you who might prefer to work in that view. So let's just quickly, I'll go through the SOPs themselves. So you can see here in our overarching organizational management concepts under planning post-award is where we first see PM 101, the SOP for project transition. You open up the link, it gives a brief description, and then the link to the SOP is here. And then all of our SOPs on Econet look like this. The actual SOP text is here on Econet for your quick reference. You can get it, quick and easy right off of Econet. we're not gonna go through it in detail again, but it's all here. And you can also, though, down here at the attachments, right at the top of the SOP, you can download the SOP itself in PDF form. There's a link here. And then, as I mentioned in the discussion on project transition workshop, the checklist, you can link to that as well. And it will give you the Microsoft Word version. I'm not sharing my actual screen. I'm only sharing that window. Give me half a second here. Apologies. Let me just share my whole desktop. Okay, so then you can see here, it downloads, and you can see the checklist here for you to set an agenda for your transition workshop. There's a lot of guidance language in here. It's more, it looks more comprehensive, not comprehensive, it looks more detailed than it is. So let me go back to Econet. So you can then access all of the SOPs that same way through the roadmap. You can go back to the roadmap and access SOP 102, project execution. And again, this is the SOP for project execution. Relating back to the slides from earlier, these sections are all the sections that we discussed. Like I said, it's somewhat of a high level discussion of the processes that we use here at ECC. And again, it needs to be updated to reflect what we showed today, which we're going to take care of this week. But again, download the SOP so you can have it locally on your computer if you want to refer to it. There is a project startup checklist that's available. It hits the main topics for project startup. Things like filling out a new job form, getting a project number, holding the teleconference, simple list of all the things that you need to do to start up a project. And then again, as I mentioned, there's a plan of the day, task instruction, as we're calling them. Oh my gosh, this is going to take a little while. Let's skip past that. So anyway, there's a sorry about that. There's a plan of the day, sort of a mini guidance document in there with an agenda for the plan of the day. Now I think you can see it here to guide you through what the contents of a plan of the day meeting should include. Then again, going back to the roadmap, 103 for project closeout. The links are here. And again, you can download the SOP if you'd like. And there's a checklist. This checklist is sort of ever evolving, and it needs to closeout is especially one of those cases where the checklist needs to be highly adapted to your specific project. Like Shovik mentioned, some projects are Navy projects and they have a requirement for red zone. Some projects, it's just a good idea to do red zone. I would argue it's always a good idea to do red zone. And so the checklist here is just a guide, as with all of our SOPs, and you should adapt it, as you see fit for your project. And then last but not least, let me go back to the roadmap. And SOP 104 for change management is here. And then you'll also see for change management, we have also, to Shovik's point about the importance of this, we've dedicated an entire knowledge area within ECC just to change management. And so, so the SOP here is supplemented by a large number of other processes that are listed on the roadmap. And again, the SOP is here. There's some suggested mechanisms for tracking changes. And to Shovik's other point, the typical FAR clauses that we see in most of our contracts are listed here. And I would highly recommend that, not everybody needs to grow up to be a lawyer, but these are really important aspects of project management for us with our government clients. And so you should understand them, understand the contents of them. And if something is unclear, talk to a contracts administrator, somebody like that who can help you understand what the change requirements are on your particular project. Most importantly being notification times and notification methods, because we don't want to lose out on our opportunity to recover something that's a change because the requirement was to respond in 7 days and we responded in 10. So let me just flip to my other cheat sheet over here and see if there's anything else. I think that is about it. Just as a other note, you can also just click here on this SOP database button at the top of EchoNet, and it lists, it will list all of the SOPs in one convenient location with the attachments available for download. And if you have any comments or complaints about the SOP, something that we need to fix, you can email Shovik or I, and take care of that. I think that's it on EchoNet. Anything else to add, Shovik? I think you're muted.
Show you're on mute.
Yes, sorry. Yes, no, I think that's as far as the training goes. I think everybody now knows where the SOPs are, and I think we've gone through a summary of all 4 of them. So just make sure that, as you go forward, just refer to the SOPs as you do work. And I think after a while, it's just going to be a matter of habit. What we want to do to finish this training, and part of this training is also making sure that our ISO certifications are maintained. We're going to have a short quiz, and that will, for those in attendance today, that will be the completion of your training. And then anybody, if people want to forward this to others who can watch the video and the PowerPoint on TalentLMS, and the quiz will be at the end of it. Natalie, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure, Shovik. So I'm about to send off the link here in the comments box quickly, but if you go and log on to TalentLMS, you should see the quiz posted under required PMCX. So if you go into your TalentLMS, you can take the quiz. It's just about 12 questions. That will also just give your attendance check just to make sure that you have a list of names, but go ahead and just take the quiz so that we can give you credit for being here today.
Thanks, Natalie. And then last thing I just wanted to say is, we talked about kind of best practices here. So one of the things that maybe others do, but certainly at the Hudson office, we have a safety meeting once. What we do at the end of the safety has to present one topic from our management system. So we just call it the ISO portion of the safety meeting. And I think that what we could do is for all projects and all offices, if you guys just take those SOPs we went through and maybe pick one section, one subsection, and just present it saying, if you do this, then, here are the steps we need to follow. I think that would also drive it home. So we really want people to be, fully aware of them. So try and see if you can incorporate that into the meetings you have. It doesn't have to be daily. It could be once a week, a couple of times a month, something like that. Okay. So that being said, thank you. I think we're just about over time, so not too bad. Anything else, Rob?
I don't have anything else. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any raised hands.
Yeah, Rob, I do. It's Mark. So you mentioned the red zone, right? And that some projects lend themselves to doing it and some projects don't. Would we have an audit finding if a project does not do a red zone event?
That's a good question, and I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I think it's right now the way the SOP is worded is it seems optional, but I think like I said, I'm a big supporter of it. Just at least in concept, right? The concept of red zone is to at about 80% complete, 75% complete to really take a deep dive into closeout. That's really the meat of a red zone. And although as Shovik said, we should be starting closeout at planning, certainly no later than when you're 75-80% complete, you should be digging into it. So but I'm gonna have to get back to you on the audit side of that and whether it's a firm requirement. I'll have to talk with Rich Joshua about that.
Thank you.
But real quick, Mark, I mean, I think that, we don't want people to think that, hey, we have to do it because of our ISO certification. I mean, the intent of this is that closeout is important. And I think everybody should dive into it, be it at the start, but certainly at the 80% mark, and then make sure that, we have a checklist so that we are working towards that closeout goal. And the part of the ISO is just to document that somehow, and it could be as simple as a one pager, or it doesn't have to be. There is no format for reporting it, As long as you do it and have some documentation, that's enough for an audit, I think.
Can I make one more comment about closeout? So I think Shobik or Rob mentioned earlier that we have a lot of projects that are completed in the field, but they're not closed out on the books, so to speak. And that's not unusual in some cases, because like for cost reimbursable projects, they may not close out for a year because we're waiting for the final indirect rates, and that will allow us to do the final billing to the client, and then we can close it out. And there's probably a dozen other reasons why we can't immediately close the project after the work is done. But there is one thing that we can do, and that's really control billing to that project. So project managers should talk to their cost analysts and close out certain WBS codes that just should not have any more charges to them. So you can lock those out so people can't charge to it. And you can lock out the entire project to additional billing. And that's a tool that we can use so that people aren't, billing an hour here, billing 2 hours there, that really may not be necessary. That's all I got.
Thanks, August. Any other questions, comments? All right.
I see a few people saying that they were not enrolled, and I think Natalie, you're keeping tabs of that, right? And you'll make sure.
Yes, that's correct. So if you have not been enrolled, please just send me a message, and I will work on getting you to make sure you have access. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everybody.
Good job, guys. Well done.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great day.
Bye.